It always bums me out that these stories end up being in the time of year when most people are away on vacation or, understandably, sleeping in after New Year's Eve, and we miss some of the most important pieces of Luke's early gospel. So we've been talking throughout all of Advent about the necessity of understanding Jesus' relation to his own people, the legacy of Israel, and the fulfillment of promises, and also the way motifs continue across the board. Today's scripture lesson is really interesting because you get not only the fact that Jesus was fulfillment, but that he was, what's the word? Brought into the community in the proper way that any good Jewish boy would. On the 8th day, he was circumcised. So he's in the covenant of Abraham. When the time had come, they took him to Jerusalem, to the temple, to be dedicated. And when he was dedicated, he was met by Simeon and Anna. And they are wonderfully powerful figures in this story. So first and foremost, what are other variations of the name Anna that you can think of? Hannah, excellent. And Anne, the Frankification of Anna from Hannah. But in other words, Hannah, the female prophet, by the way, is sort of reminding us of who in the Old Testament? Hannah, mother of Samuel. Hey, come on in. And so not only is the legacy of Hannah continuing through Elizabeth and John the Baptist, but also in the temple itself. So right off the bat, you have Jesus inextricably interwoven into the fabric of the Jewish people, the Jewish covenants, and the temple itself. And then Simeon is one who was promised that he would not die until he saw the consolation of God be revealed to him. Now, that's kind of a bittersweet thing to have. I can't wait to see God's anointed, but that also means it's basically the death knell for me to pass on. But I love the fact that when he was able to hold Jesus in his arms, said, God, you have set your servant free because I have seen the light of Israel and the glory of Israel and the light unto the Gentiles. Have you ever done Compline? Yeah. So you know the nunc dimittis near the end of the prayer? Well, it's this actual phrase, this little paragraph here. Master, now it's technically, Lord, you are dismissing your servant in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel. There's so much we can unpack here. I like to do a little bit of deep dive into the context here, but I want to focus in terms of what I think is really powerful in this story for our lives are the two statements by Simeon and then by Anna. When Simeon recognizes that he is holding God's Messiah in his hand, he prophesied to Mary, or said to Mary, this child is destined for the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be opposed, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too. Way to make it awkward, Simeon. She just brought her kid to be dedicated to the temple, and you just acknowledged he's God's anointed. And what do you tell her? This child is going to be a sign that will be opposed. He will bring the rising and falling of many, and his words will bring forth the inner thoughts of many to be revealed. Oh, and by the way, Mary, a sword will pierce your heart also. Mothers, does that sound like something you want to hear about the future of your child? So we've got this challenging moment where Simeon, who has been righteous and devout his whole life, kind of like Mary and or Zachariah and Elizabeth, so on and so forth, and he is internally focused of recognizing the challenges that are presented by what this means. You cannot have God's anointed and the consolation of your people without conflict and challenge. You can't grow in your spiritual transformation in God and in community without challenge. Have you ever found that moment where as you grew up, people you knew just grew older, but never matured, and it brought conflict? Or when you got excited about something that brought fullness of life to you that others did not approve, and it caused conflict and sometimes irreparable damage to the relationship? That's the painful reality of following the way of love. The irony is the thing that unites us the most is also the thing that can drive the hardest wedges. When we hold to the strength of love, when we hold to the boundaries of love, when we hold ourselves to the high standard of seeking the ultimacy of God, it does not always work out the way we hoped. It's one of the bitter disappointments of the best things in life. And I think it's sort of a moment of both foreshadowing of what Jesus is going to do, but also a strange cold comfort by the fact that Jesus' ministry would cause great conflict. We're still dealing with that conflict today, 2,000 years later, in disputes among Christians, anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism in Christianity. But it wasn't that Jesus did these things. He brought about the entrance of God's kingdom in a new way. But that means change. That means transfer of power. That means rethinking how the world works. After all, Jesus did not lead as an overlord, but as a servant. And it was his sacrifice that brought about the kingdom, not his victory in war. So looking internally, resonating and wrestling with the full breadth of what it means that God's anointed one, the one who has come to liberate us from oppression, to liberate us from violence, disease, difference, distinction, divisions, hatred, war, is not one who comes in quietly and gently and easy. But then there's Anna. I think she's probably actually Anna, but strange thing. She had 7 years with her husband and then was widowed and stayed in the temple. While technically speaking, people didn't live at the temple that way, I think Luke was trying to help demonstrate that she was bringing the temple experience into the conversation with Jesus, who would later challenge aspects of the temple. The temple was a seat of the spiritual lives of Jerusalem. And what does she do when she finds him? Does she look introspectively and worry about what might happen? No. She goes out and tells anyone who will listen to her, even people who won't listen to her, everywhere in the temple. She's going around saying, check it out, he's here, he's here. Oh my God, he's here. God has brought God's anointed. You've got to see this, you've got to know. This is really exciting. Everything we've been hoping for is finally here. A little bit of a different response. Again, those things you can't help but share. Think of those things. The things that bring you immense joy, excitement, and hope and consolation. That is what Hannah could not keep silent about and shared it with everyone around. So on the one hand, you have Simeon, they're both older, they're both elders, they're both keepers of wisdom. Something that is often lost in our society is that age is a number, but there are things to be learned from all generations. Is one who is looking for God's consolation. And consolation can also be translated as redemption in the Greek. He's looking for that moment, and when he has found it, he can rest. But he also wants to make sure that we understand the full weight of what it is that has come into being here. And so the need to make sure we look introspectively, to recognize the full reality of what it is that we are embarking on, which is not often a comfortable thing, but a wonderful thing and an ultimate blessing. And also, it will reveal the inner thoughts of many, something that is never comfortable. But nonetheless, the revelation of the inner thoughts of many is necessary. It's necessary for the sake of the world being better. If we don't reveal corruption in the world, it continues to fester and poison. But it's never a comfortable process. If we have to bring reform and change and expansion of what it means to be the community of God in the church, many people will not want that. And many people will recognize that sometimes what they think is the right way of doing things may actually be hindering what it is that God is trying to bring about. Or people who are trying to utilize the church for means that are not of God. Their inner thoughts will be revealed as the light of Christ shines around us. So introspection, recognition, examining ourselves to ensure that we are living into the fullness of the love of God and the light of God. But also, if this is really good news, we're going to be sharing it with everyone. We're not going to be able to keep silent about this, because when we recognize that hope, that consolation, and knowing that ultimately all the conflict and challenges that Simeon points to are never the final word, that word is the light and life of God found in this little baby. That's more powerful than anything we could imagine. And that's why evangelism, the true meaning of the word, reminds you, not come, you must be part of my religion or else you're going to fry in hell for eternity. That's not evangelism. That's proselytizing. Evangelism is, I have this incredibly good news and I want to share it with you and I want to invite you into it if it's something you want to be participatory in. My good news, I'm getting married in April. And when you get married, you invite people. Unfortunately, we can't afford to invite everyone that we want to, which is why we will have a party here at some point so that everyone who couldn't make it to that can participate. But you don't keep that silent. When you have a baby, do you hide that from everybody else? When you have really neat information, like when you graduate from college or high school or whatever, you want to share that with everyone in the world. Even when you find a great restaurant, you want to tell people about it. Sharing the message of God in our lives is hard because the reality is a lot of people mistake what we do for proselytizing into a cult, into brainwashing people, into not thinking and just accepting things at face value. Because so many people in the name of our faith do precisely that. The good news about the Episcopal approach to Jesus is that is the opposite of what we do. We have our stories that are guidelines for how to be, but it's our lives together that makes us who we are. And it's much more difficult to live a life of love than it is to assert to a set of doctrines. It's much easier to point your finger at someone and say, you're wrong because you don't believe the right things, than it is to say, I don't know, let's love one another and see what comes of it. And that is the ultimacy of what we are examining in this time between the birth of Jesus moving into his ministry, as we begin our way out into the world to share that light and love with other people in a way that invites them into a place of freedom, in a place of expansion, and ultimately a place where love reigns supreme. So may we, on the one hand, take in internally the importance of the internal introspection, the looking inside of ourselves that Simeon points to as part of the necessity of our lives together in God. Nonetheless, let's go out there and just and find what makes you excited about this and share that with the world, especially as we embark on New Year's Day into 2023 and a very new chapter of St. Anne's, and a very new chapter of the church, a very new chapter of the world in many ways. We have an exciting opportunity here that, like the birth of Jesus on that day 2,000 years ago, or 2,023 years ago, we have God's breath, God's spirit, God's anointed, and God's change breathing new life into the world. Let us participate and celebrate that together. Amen.